Last day of World Economic Forum. I see that some people already left because of the last day, so thank you for joining us. And thanks to Caspian Week for inviting us. And of course, thanks to our distinguished panelists for joining us. So today, our panel discussion will be smart economy on blockchain, digital assets, digital identity, and regulations. So before I start this panel, I would like to introduce myself briefly and also ask my distinguished panelists to introduce themselves as well. So my name is Lily Zhao. I'm the Director of Ecosystem Growth at Neo Global Development. This is the entity that carries out the operations for the public blockchain Neo. So Neo is a smart contract platform. And about myself, I'm based in Zurich, and I studied economics at University of London and did my MBA at St. Gallen. So before joining the blockchain space, I was working in banking. So now I would like to Ronald to introduce yourself, then we'll continue all the panelists. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Ronald Kogans.
Yeah.
I'm a Swiss lawyer with Rorip in Zurich. And I'm coming from the IT and technology law side and advising clients in new disruptive technology projects, currently in particular in connection with distributed ledger technology and also tokenizing of assets. Yes, that's about me.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andreas Moreira. I'm project manager for Wisecoin and cryptocurrency at Wisekey. We're based in Geneva, and for almost 20 years, we've been in avant-garde of all the new technologies such as IoT, AI, machine learning. And this year, we're planning to put forth our advance in technology into the blockchain world. So I'm very happy to see you guys today.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Daniel Gasteiger. I'm a co-founder of 3 blockchain initiatives in Zurich. One is Trust Square, the biggest blockchain hub in the world by now. We have more than 40 startups working on the topic of blockchain in all the fields that you can imagine. My main job is CEO of Perceivis, which is a company that is working with governments to digitalize services of governments, mainly digital identity, but also e-voting and all the other obvious use cases that blockchain technology makes sense for. And then I'm also co-founder of Verum Capital, which is an advisory company in the blockchain space, helping startups to basically raise capital through ICOs, STOs, and so forth.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Francesco. I'm a mechanical engineer by background. I did my MBA in the States. I started a mining farm that afterwards got acquired by an American company. Now I'm basically doing consulting for STO, more on the technical side. And a part of that, I'm based in Zurich, London, and New York.
Hi, I'm Ben Banerjee. I think many of you know me, so I have a couple of hats. Today, the most relevant is InMind. It's a kind of platform helping startups with fundraising. I'm also on the board of European Family Office Alliance, so we have like 200 families from the western part, or the German-speaking part of Europe. And I'm in a couple of think tanks advising governments in a couple of countries like Russia, United States, Armenia, and Switzerland on the policies. Basically, my interest or my angle is from the macroeconomics. And since last 1.5 years, I'm also in the blockchain field, advising in the blockchain policies. Yeah.
All right, first of all, thank you, audience. I think you're the most committed audience Friday afternoon last day to still be here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Caspian Week. I think you are the most vibrant tent of blockchain-related discussions over here. And thank you, Lily. You've been the best moderator, kept us coordinated, as much as Daniel, my previous moderator yesterday.
No, I'm under pressure.
Thanks for keeping us honest. My name's Gurvinder Ahluwalia. I'm the founder and CEO of Digital Twin Labs, based out of US, Dallas, Texas. Digital Twin Labs is focused on delivering strategy. We've delivered strategy for large and small enterprises, and that is led by Frontier Technologies, of course spearheaded by blockchain, but also includes other components of technology that are in the frontier, specifically IoT, cloud, and increasingly AI and machine learning. So really the synthesis of those and how we bring those to the market and to clients are kind of the implementations and shaping of the strategy that we've done. Previously, I was the Chief Technology Officer for IBM North America for the blockchain, IoT, and cloud unit. Once again, thanks for having me on the panel.
Thank you very much, everyone. I would also like to mention that unfortunately we are missing one of our panelists. We're missing Karat from Astana International Financial Center. He's actually currently in a taxi here, and he's been trying to order taxi since 10:30. If he's stuck in one village, if we had known, we would have asked him to walk here. Probably would have been faster. So I hope he can join us soon. So now we will kick off this panel discussion. So digital asset is a very broad term. Today we'll focus mainly on tokenization of assets. Even within this tokenization of assets, there's many different terminologies used by different people. So there's asset-backed tokens, and there's tokenized assets. So in case you think they are the same or you're confused, trust me, you're not alone. So luckily, we have a Swiss lawyer, not just anyone, but one of the most highly sought after in Switzerland. So Ronald, please, I'm quite pedantic, so let's define the terminology. What's asset-backed tokens? What is tokenized assets? Are they not the same? If they're different, what's the key difference? Are they both security tokens? And if not, then why not?
Thanks, Lee. So for me, there is, as Lily said, a clear distinction between asset token and asset-backed tokens. So if you're talking about asset tokens, this means that a physical asset, for example, a painting, which is non-fungible, will be tokenized. For example, if I have a Van Gogh painting and tokenize this painting into 8 tokens, which means the token itself represents a deed of joint ownership on the painting. Usually in these structures, then the painting is with a duty-free custodian at an airport, for example, and the token holders are all together joint owners, but for a specific physical asset. Then compared to these asset tokens, which by the way are not securities in my opinion, we have the asset-backed tokens, where the token represents a right against the issuer or someone else, a third party, to claim something. For example, an asset-backed token can be that the token represents stock in a company, but also stable coins where you have a right to exchange, for example, in US dollars or another currency or commodity that is underlying your token. So this means you not owning the commodities underlying the tokens, you just have a right, for example, to exchange in this commodity. So I think this is a very important distinction, because the asset tokens itself are, in my opinion, not securities, because you are a joint owner of the physical asset, but you're just using the blockchain technology and tokens to split the physical asset up and to make it more tradable than traded on a physical basis.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's very insightful, if anyone followed. And it's really fascinating because even in the blockchain space, everyone's using this term very loosely, very interchangeably. So earlier you mentioned asset tokens are not security tokens. Did I hear that correct?
Yes, that's correct, because usually if an asset token, it represents a very specific physical asset. And for a physical asset, you're not creating thousands of tokens.
But if you are creating thousands of tokens, you are doing a sales, public sales to these assets, then it is security tokens.
I mean, if you're creating thousands of tokens only for one specific asset, then maybe you have to argue against a financial market regulator that it's still not a security, because, I mean, who want to be owner of 1,000 of a painting? But, I mean, at the end, if you can argue that it's not a right, it's really a specific fungible, non-fungible physical asset, then I think you can still argue that it's not going to be a security.
Very interesting. Okay, so just for the record, here we'll use this term very loosely rather than very specific in a legal case. So now I'm really pleased Karat has joined us. So how long have you been trying to order a taxi? 4 hours, 3 hours?
Yeah, it's hard to order taxi here, especially if you are not in Davos particularly.
Okay.
Yeah, but I get.
Yeah, next
Sorry
time, just walk here.
Yeah, 2.5 hours, right?
Yeah. So we just started the panel, and you're not too late. Maybe brief introduction of yourself and also Astana International Financial Center.
Yeah, my name is Karat Khalif. I'm managing director at AIFC. It's Astana International Financial Center. It's a newly launched jurisdiction based on English common law, which is quite new on post-Soviet countries. Mm-hmm. And so our main target is to develop financial services and attract foreign investors through this jurisdiction. Our main pillars is capital markets, private equity, asset management, Islamic finance, and of course fintech. And in terms of fintech, of course, it's blockchain and this like cryptocurrency tokenization. We are developing a regulation on it, and have.
Good to hear that. Good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So now let's turn to Andreas, and we discussed the terminology, but now let's talk about the actual use case of STO, security token offering. So Andreas, you are the second generation of a very successful family business, which is listed on the SIX stock exchange, WiseKey. So now you also set up a separate legal entity called WiseCoin AG. So the WiseCoin will be launching a security token offering. So what is the rationale behind this decision? And in comparison to the traditional fundraising method, what made you decide to choose STO?
Thank you very much. As you said, yeah, thank you. We're planning to launch our STO this year for WiseCoin. And
so STO, yeah.
STO, yeah, that's it, yeah, STO, oh, sorry. STO, because as you may know, today to launch your own IPO revolves around a lot of regulation, and it's really a big barrier for a lot of small startups or like teams who want to develop their ideas and raise funds around those projects. Yeah. So nowadays, no one's interested in launching their own IPO. Like the regulations are too strong, and the investors as well, the new generation, they're not following IPOs anymore. They're on STOs, because STOs, what's beautiful about it is that you're giving away so those assets, those truly assets, you're giving a security to those investors. And those investors, they're really attracted by the simplicity of the STO. Everyone could, like, with the regulation in place, be able to put forth and raise funds for this STO. So I think it's a great idea, and I think it's the beautiful. It's like in a decentralized world to have those STOs going on.
So this STO, are you planning to do a public sale, or is only open to institutional sale?
So in the first time for us at WiseCoin, we're looking for private sale, of course. We have already localized a few really potential investors. We'd like not to talk too much about our own project, because we like to keep the surprise effect if possible. But as of right now, we're looking to tokenize about 25% of the whole stock value of their company. And if the raise funds are enough, we might not go to the ICO phase, because you may know, the STO, the open sale of the STO will be
public sale.
Today it's really complicated with the FINMA. They're really kind of slow to respond. I'm sure they're doing their best, but there's a lot of work, a lot of demand to STOs on the market. So that's why we'll eventually to stay on private if possible.
And how much do you plan to raise in this STO?
So we're looking about the 25 to 30 million, because we have this unique project that we really focus on, which is the WiseCoin project. We really have a big knowledge on IoT and semiconductors from WiseKey. We've been huge on the digital identity, and we really believe that all items should have their own digital identity through their ecosystem. So the idea is that with Wisecon, you will be able to have a network of all those items that will be connecting to each other through this identity and be mostly secure, because nowadays you cannot be trusting any other items which is behind this cloud, you know?
Yeah.
So we really truly believe that with Wisecoin, with the experience we gathered at WiseKey, and with the help of blockchain, DLTs, and decentralized ledgers, really to put forth this new generation of security items.
Because WiseKey, this is the parent company, which is a listed company, and now with Wisecoin, you issue a separate security token. How does this affect your shareholder of WiseKey? Is there any relation between these two entities and also their respective shareholders or token holders?
Yeah, so it has been a big problem. Like, we really try to separate closely the shareholders from WiseKey and the new shareholders that will come for Wisecoin, because we're planning to, we already, as you said, in the Swiss stock exchange market, and we're planning to launch our own IPO for WiseKey this year in NASDAQ and in the American market. But as you may know, Americans, they may, be wary of what we're trying to do with tokens. So we don't want to, be trying to create fear or anything in this new market war. So we're really trying to separate really distinctly those two sales that we're doing. So we're planning to do our own IPO for WiseKey as soon as possible. And when we're forthcoming, we'll be focused mostly on the STO for Wisecoin. So there will not be a issue related.
Yeah. Thank you. Then now let me jump to Ben, because Andreas, as you mentioned, for your security token offering, you mainly look at private sale, institutional clients. So Ben, among his many important hats, such as consulting world leaders, he's also the board member of European Family Office Alliance. So I was quite curious, how much being a former banker, I was thinking, wow, this Family Office Alliance, how much money they have? What's the assets under management? But of course, I know this could be confidential information. So if you could, then give us some context of this alliance, if you could. If not, jump straight to the next question. So when you talk to this traditional money, big money, could be like hundreds of billions with such a family office alliance. So what's their interest level and investment appetite for blockchain technology or tokenized assets? So I say interest level and investment appetite, because these two are different. Like currently, everyone's interested in blockchain technology. Everyone is talking about tokenized assets, but token is different from investing. And we're all interested in things, new technology, things we don't understand. But investing is buying into this. So when you talk to this institutional money, are they investing or not? If not, then what's the barrier? What's their concerns?
I think you asked quite a lot of questions. I'll try to remember them.
You have some time. Yes.
So basically, I'm talking about families like the Rockefellers, families from the Nordics, from West Europe, Germany, Netherlands, whether you call them the Brennick-Myers or whatever. There's a lot of factors going on. For example, to start with, today was a depressing day. There was a news that in Switzerland and in Liechtenstein, in the last 3 months, among the 500 biggest blockchain companies, they have lost their value with more than 50% in 3 months. So the valuation has reduced from 44 billion to 20 billion. This really makes it a very tough selling job to sell to the old traditional money, who are quite very risk averse. But on the other side, the positive is that the old money, the traditional money, they think long term. Because these are generally third generation, fourth generation, sixth generation. They are not very much stuck to what is going to happen tomorrow or in a month. They're looking long term. So that's one variable. Other variable is the age factor. The younger generation is much more technology affluent. They know much more about what they're doing, where they're investing money, and things like that. And I think the third point, which is also becoming slowly very important, is the thematic. The old money, they are very much, especially the millennium generation, especially the new generation, they're looking at the theme. which theme are you investing in? What is the theme? For example, ICOs are quite, at this moment, doing bad. I mean, I can speak for Switzerland.
Yeah.
But 2 or 3 weeks ago, one of the ICO was a very big success in Zug because it was in the alternative energy. So that's what I meant by theme. So these are a lot of variables which are playing. So if your first question is about interest, yes, there is definitely interest, and I have been seeing it in the last 1.5 years. 1.5 years ago, if I would speak about blockchain. And another problem with blockchain is people often associate blockchain with cryptocurrency. The moment you say that, they go like this. Now, they're getting more and more interested. Even the older generation, even they are coming up with, what is this thing, to be invested. So interest level is there. How much they're really investing, that's still depressing.
Yes.
They're still very small. I think it will take time to mature.
Yeah, but even for such traditional old money to invest 1% of the hundreds of billions AUM, then we'll see significant positive impact in this space. So we're counting on you for the work. And so Andreas, you should talk to Ben afterwards. And if you raise money through Ben, and I will take my card. Yeah. So now let's turn back to Daniel. And Daniel, he launched a very successful ICO last year. And the interesting thing about this ICO is that he probably refused more money than he accepted. And it's one that ICO has been held as a role model, refused to do lots of social media splashed out everywhere. So you did ICO in 2018. And then today, when you look at the ICO, STO space, then what advice would you give to people who are trying to raise money in this method?
So basically be serious, and exactly what you said, what we didn't do is go out and sell the world something that we could not deliver, but be serious about the project that you're actually raising capital for. Be serious about the chances that you're actually successful with that thing, because I think the raising money through an ICO or an STO nowadays is not something new. It's something like what you've been doing as a startup all the time. You have to have a business plan, you have to have a conviction into your project that you're doing, and you need to sell that in a serious way. It's just a different way of raising it from people. You have much more audience. Obviously, you don't go through VCs, have individual meetings. You have basically the world at your hand that you can raise money from. And so it's a question of being serious. And what we see with Verum Capital, which is basically the company we founded after we did our ICO, which we called at the time the gold standard here in Switzerland when it comes to how to run an ICO with full KYC, with full AML checks, with a fully self-regulated entity, being not overly promising, not using social media channels left, right, and center to promise things that you cannot deliver. So with that experience, we then basically built a company called Verum Capital, and since then go on to actually do the work like this. And what has changed is now you cannot go out and put a white paper on a website and expect to raise money from that. So you will really need to go back much more to the individual discussion level with professional investors, basically people that are doing this very actively and professionally. So going more closely to the old school VC equity raise model. And so most of the things we see at Verum Capital, it's all about private sale. You go to people, you basically don't even publicly announce that you're raising capital through an STO, but you do this in a private placement mechanism. And that's, I think, has changed. So I think an ICO, the way we did it even, is a thing of the past. It's just changed when it comes to the way of doing a professional fundraising.
Great. Yeah, speaking of the professional fundraising, I just see the Vetri Foundation. The Vetri is a project that Daniel is talking about. The president of the Vetri Foundation is there, and yes. So if anyone who has questions regarding the ICO and how they're doing, and you can also approach this. Monica and Eve sitting in the audience. Yes. So now my next question is to Francesco. Francesco, you have been a consultant to projects end-to-end services. from smart contract auditing to token economics.
Yeah.
So how have you seen the, in terms of service you are offering, the demand from your client? How have you seen this changed from the days of ICO hype to today, calmer, more realistic approach?
Yeah, definitely the target from soft and dark hub is definitely changed it. Yeah, and
Does that mean you're making less money?
yeah, but you need to be more concrete and practical. I think on what is really your value proposition and how you structure your token economics. Mostly of the business that we consulting are traditional, and after like 30 years they have a positive cash flow and they would like to start and raising money. Yeah, the goal is always to have a business model that create an ecosystem where you create value, not just raising. But keeping it short, I think you really need to think about your ecosystem, and in general, don't just go to an STO. I mean, there are extremely a lot of valuable VC. I mean, you can still go fundraising and then going for a private placement afterwards.
Yeah, it's different stage and different purpose of fundraising with different methods. Yeah.
Yes.
Great, thank you. And now let's turn to Kairat. So you mentioned that there's a new financial center which was set up last year, a new financial center. One of the priority sector is fintech and blockchain technology, crypto assets. So what is the policy there, and how would you encourage that blockchain and crypto projects go to Astana to set up offices there?
Yeah. First of all, our position is that we have to regulate this sphere.
Yeah.
Even if you are just trading crypto, there are minimum requirements for KYC AML.
Yeah.
And so in terms of doing this business, like clearly working with financial institutions and show it on your balance, for example. So you have to have rules from government side. And we last year we have developed a framework of crypto regulation in order to regulate these activities. And this year we are developing crowdfunding and STO regulation for this kind of fundraising. Here we think that STO and crowdfunding, different forms of crowdfunding, is it should be regulated to make these issuers act more responsibly.
Yeah.
And at the same time, not to like push them and and from one side it's to protect consumers and investor rights. From the other side, not to let this business be like pushed and over-regulated from government side.
Yeah.
So, and we are trying to find this balance, and we are developing a regulation with EBRD and with helping of EBRD and law firms, and so we hope to build like light version of stock exchange in order to raise money through STOs.
Great. As you mentioned, there's really fine balance between regulations, policy to protect the vulnerable and at the same time do not stifle innovations.
Yeah.
Thank you. So now let's turn to Gurvinder. Gurvinder is the expert behind the Digital Twins Lab. It's an initiative that he started, and Digital Twin is quite a fancy name, and what I understand is the replicate of the physical asset. This asset, be it people, objects, process, and so can you elaborate what is Digital Twin and how this is being used in the blockchain space? And if you have any, I know you consult many projects, and can you give us example of success and failure case?
There are more failures than successes. If I were to rename digital twins, it would be digital triplets.
Yeah.
We actually have 3 sons, and 2 of them are twins, and the third one always asks me why he's not represented in the name of the company. But the idea of digital twins, in fact, there are 3 aspects to it. The notion, not so much the company, of course, it motivates how we approach in the work that we do, is fundamentally 3 flows I think the world grapples with. And that is the physical flow, it's the digital flow, and it's the payment flow. And the world is broken across these 3 flows. And that's not a good or bad statement, that's the state of affairs. And we are now poised as a technology disruption industry, and a technology consumption industry, and a technology regulated industry, whichever way and discipline you want to come at it from, we are poised to try to bring those 3 aspects together. So it is a very, very difficult task. And I think so let me segue kind of that rubric into more of the architecture thinking, which is the DNA that my career comes from. There are really a separate set of 3 things that we are all dealing with. Okay, so let me put that in perspective, and I'll go to the extent when you interrupt me, I'll go as deep as you desire.
Yeah.
Real 3, one is there is a protocol and a platform layer, right? That's the core. You can't start without that, and these are also in sequence. The other is the application or the marketplace layer. And then the third is the crypto-economic layer. Now, those 3 are not all essential. The first one is essential, otherwise you're not in this business, in the decentralized business. The second one, of course, is where the business value is. There is no business value in having just an underlying protocol. The third one is optional, which is the whole discussion around tokens. And that is whether you want to have an intrinsic model of tokens in your solution or in your n-dimensional marketplace or in your product, whatever you want to call it. There are probably other economic models on how you will sustain your business, and that's fine. I'll close with a last set of comments, which will tag team a little bit on the terminology question that you raised to Ronald, and that is to clarify a little bit more around tokens. If you want to understand tokens, you have to understand 2 things before that. It's a prerequisite. One is you have to understand network platforms and network effects. I'll state a few lines on each of these in just a moment. The other is you have to understand decentralization. Real briefly, what do I mean? So if you look at the chronology, there's something called network effects, which was, and there's a law around it called Metcalfe's law. How many of you ever heard of it? Metcalfe's law basically states that the value of a platform, the utility of a platform, is directly proportional to the square of the number of participants in it. Basic network. That's also how Ethernet works. When e-marketplaces came around in e-commerce, another law was raised called Reed's law. I'll be honored if somebody of you have heard of Reed's law. Anybody? And in that, the value of the network is exponentially related to the number of participants. Mm-hmm. The reason I gave you those 2 descriptions is because we need a similar third description in order to understand tokens. Tokens are on a network effect, but they have what has been described by the person who coined this name. I believe his name is Nick Soman, and that it has a double effect. So you're not just tracking the utility value of the network as the number of participants go up. You are tracking 2 things in a token network, and this is really key takeaway that I'd like you to leave with. You're tracking the financial utility, and you're tracking the application utility. So you're now dealing with 2 curves, and the effect of those 2 curves on the number of nodes of the participants on it, right? So most of the quote-unquote madness around tokens and ICOs, or you can call it STOs, and whatever the next thing is going to be after that, is because there has been more attention to the financial value of tokens as opposed to the application value of tokens. So there has to be a little bit better rebalancing of those two utilities in order for the industry to arrive at the next phase, if I may. Again, I never make good or bad characterization. I'm making characterization of the state of the affairs and our collective maturity in taking this forward. Let me just stop over there and come back to you later.
Yes, it's a very, very interesting in theory, and I believe that in the blockchain space, I'm quite pragmatic. So we have lots of interesting theory and academia, and it's something we can talk about. But this space is in nascent technologies, and I believe knowledge comes from learning by doing. So can you give me, you mentioned lots of failure case, can you maybe give me a concrete example of industry use case, and then very concrete?
So first of all, I want to defend a little bit myself that it's not just theory. Because I think one of the things we have to give attention to is that there has to be fundamental economics. There's no economist on the panel? Okay, there you are. There has to be fundamental economic theory.
I think, I also study economics.
Oh, there you are.
And what I can say is I'm not a good student, so okay. And most things we study in economics is you use very complicated mathematical theory to prove something actually is quite common sense. That's not to say economics is not useful, but that's also a joke. I like it when they talk about economics. For economics to study horses, they don't go to the field to examine horses. They just sit in a study room, they assume they are horses, and that's the conclusion they make.
All right, I'll grant you that. I'm not an economist, so I can't defend any economics really. But I come from the technology side. So back to the central question that you have. From my direct experiences, right?
Yes, because you consulted a few projects and
most of my
implement this. So what are the concrete user case, failure and success?
Most of my work has been in the enterprise space, large enterprise spaces. I'll cite to you a few of that works, and then one of that, and then separately more on the, at least one example on the startup space. I haven't been in the ICO space per se. The enterprise space, there are two examples where tokenization of the networks, and both of these are supply chain cases, by the way. Most of my work has been, for Digital Twin Labs, has been in supply chain, financial services, fintech, and IoT, and increasingly in the autonomous vehicle, automotive mobility space, not just automotive, but mobility, which includes drones and other mobility elements. There are at least two examples that I'll share with you, both of which happen to be in the supply chain, but both of them also happen to be in the enterprise space. One of them is for tokenization of a marketplace for aviation parts. And the other one is for, let's just say, earth-derived materials and the global trade and supply chain for that industry, right? So those are two very different examples, but they're in the same domain, that is supply chain. Both of them are at a stage of experimentation where the underlying, meaning the platform has been proven, the application has been proven, they're in a state of experimentation as far as the tokenization of it has to become pervasive. Why did we introduce tokenization into large enterprises? The single most important problem that tokenization solves for these two of my experiences of my clients is it provides an incentive and a realignment mechanism in bringing the ecosystem of their participants together. Otherwise, enterprises, large ecosystems are basically pulled apart on who will going to control it, right? So the word control is an antithesis in a world of decentralization. So the allocation of the tokens, and another point I will add to the practices in it, none of those initiatives were successful, or we did not even attempt to create them within the existing legal entity of those enterprises. So they were taken out as separate ventures that were created, more in the foundation model, so that there is neutrality in the marketplace for the provenance and authenticity of aviation parts.
So if you
and
have
for the
to
other one.
summarize
You have to separate it out.
Okay.
The cultures of large enterprises that want to go for tokenized based marketplaces are too strong.
Yeah.
And as they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you have to basically create separate legal entities in order to make this practical and real.
So in terms of failure points, and if you just three points.
The failure point.
Very concrete, 3 points.
The failure point is around the whole regulatory framework of these ventures and the tokens for this.
Okay.
Both of these are one is entirely U.S. based. Of course, they're all global. The other one is European based, but of course presence in U.S. as well. And a lot of the entities in this case are regulated by U.S. jurisdiction.
Interesting.
And there are two basic tests. One is the Howey test, right? Ronald can probably speak to it more. But I mean, increasingly there is a new one. Let me just state this. We can go into it if you like.
Yeah.
And that is called the Hinman standard of tokens.
Yeah.
Which is recently being advanced and tested.
Yeah. Very interesting. I think you have so much knowledge. We could pick your brains on this topic, for a whole another panel.
Smarter people are to my left.
Yeah. So now I want to attach another topic of the smart economy. We're talking about tokenization of assets, but without digital identity, and this is very hard to implement. Digital identity is the bridge between the online world and our real world. And here, Daniel, he's very much an expert in this topic. And before I ask you further, first, again, terminology. So everyone's talking about digital identity in the blockchain space. So first, what is digital identity? And what is digital identity on blockchain? And what is self-sovereign identity? And its respective development. You have 3 minutes, don't worry. Don't have to.
Go, Daniel.
Yes.
Okay, let's start. First of all, digital identity, I think it's a way to represent what you are in the physical world as a person or as an object in a way that makes it unique and that it can be identified through attributes that are assigned to you and only you. So that's the digital identity when it comes to the definition as I see it. Then digital identity in a blockchain at the moment is just a way to actually represent these attributes individually on a blockchain as what is called decentralized identifiers at the moment. There's a standard being developed called DIDs. That's the big missing piece on the internet at the moment, that you can actually attach an identity to an object or a person on the internet and then make it transferable. I guess that's what Andreas talked about it before as well, across different units of be it a website or be it a transaction that you need to authenticate yourself with. And then self-sovereign identity is something totally new. That's the biggest hype. I think this year's hype is going to be self-sovereign identity.
Only you are doing it.
3 minutes already?
Oh, no.
Okay. Self-sovereign identity is basically the next level. So you basically at the moment get issued an identity, be it by a government, be it by your bank when you do KYC. In the future, the idea is that you actually manage your own identity in a self-sovereign way, so that you actually decide yourself who you are. Obviously, you need to find people to attest for you that you are who you claim to be. And that identity then is actually getting a reputation based on people that acknowledge and attest for your identity as per your own definition. And then that identity has to be manageable by yourself as per the standard definition. So you and only you actually manage the identity. You actually share information from that identity with somebody if you choose to do so. And you can actually also reject and basically reclaim identity information from somebody, third party. In Europe, we see the GDPR law going in that direction. So the right to be forgotten, for instance, if you're a client of a company, or for that matter with Facebook, you can actually go back to Facebook now and say, I want to be forgotten, delete everything that you have on me, and that's actually law now, which is going in the direction of self-sovereign identity for the future.
Great. I'm really excited to see the further advancement of digital identity, because this is the key element of digital assets and the smart economy. Ronald, I would like to have legal point of view on digital identity. And then, Ben, you want to comment on
Yeah, I
something?
just wanted to add to
please.
Daniel's, because when I was in Armenia, I was talking the same with the government there. They are thinking very strongly about applying. But what is, with the digital identity, what I always say is don't take the rules and regulations that already exist in normal paper identity to cut and paste and copy it into digital. That will not work. Secondly, what I have issue is the ownership. Who is going to own that identity? Is it going to be the person who has the identity, or is it the government or some central authority? There are regulatory criteria. What criteria should that identity fulfill to become an accepted digital identity, for example, by financial institutions or whatever? And the last was the administration. Who administers this, or where it is administered, or who controls it? I think these are also very important factors which policymakers should look into before they take or accept something as an official digital identity.
Well, identity is such a complex topic. I mean, it can be a very philosophical discussion in itself. So there's a famous quote from a Kenyan philosopher who said, "I am because we are, and we are because I am." And so if you take it to that level, who owns identity, the government issuing identity, is that right or wrong? It's definitely a question of the context. I mean, we are here in Switzerland, I'm Swiss. I'm very much happy that the government of Switzerland issues my identity, and I'm proud of that. But probably in other cases it's not obvious that, and we are working with a project with the Rohingya refugees that don't have an identity at all because they've been taken it away by Burma some 20 years ago. And so it's very philosophical, and then we have a legal discussion about this topic as well. So it's very complex and warrants a panel for itself if you just start with definitions about it.
So, Ronald, would you like to complicate it further, a complicated topic?
I mean, from a legal perspective, of course, it's data protection is one point, and I think the challenge there is everyone talks about you have to own your data again and get back your data, but the problem is that data is non-rivalrous, which means if I disclose my personal data to you, I cannot get back the control of it. So you can share it with whomever you want. It's not the same if I give you my iPad, because if you give it to me back, I know I have it back, but with data I don't know if you still have a copy or not. So I think this is a big challenge, and there with an identity on the blockchain, at least you can have a track where the verifiers of your data are going and in which direction, and maybe this gives some kind of control over the data, even though it's not the same like with physical assets. And I think this is something very important, especially in terms of data protection. And then on the other hand, as Danny just mentioned, I think that the great thing about these identities is that in countries where people don't have an identity, they can get an identity even though they haven't got one from an authority, but they have an identity because the people around this person know this person, can verify this person, and create an identity by trust of third parties without having the trust of an authority. And I think this is a general very interesting aspect of decentralization, by giving the people back some kind of power instead of just have everything dictated by the authorities. But of course, I mean, it's a very challenging line, and it must be well balanced between the power of the people and the power of the government.
Yeah, can I add something? I think you're saying a really good point, Ronald. I would like to say something. You're speaking about data, right? And I'm very bullish on identity being self-ownership. But when we're speaking about data in general, for example, being self-owner of your private key, any storage decentralized value, what I think we are assuming always in this space that people won't own their private keys. And my personal opinion is that the people are not, I mean, the public is not, doesn't have the auto-discipline to be a self-custodial. That's why people, for example, for password, they're going to lastpass.com and not having their password on a paper. That's why, like, I think maybe because the system is maybe too much, there is too much fraction to do that, and the user journey is not easy. But regulation for sure are not helping in that space.
But if I may add to this point, that's nothing to do with identity. Private key management is the one single biggest issue with blockchain getting mainstream. Everything depends on your private key being stored and safely managed by yourself at the moment, or by some custodians that are more and more becoming available as well. But that's exactly the reason why nothing really gets, in a broader sense, developed with blockchain, because that's the key one issue. I think it's solvable because it's ultimately a question. You have your PIN code for your bank card, you have your password for your email address. Some way, one way or another, you can manage this also in the future in a decentralized fashion. That's what we are doing with obviously decentralized applications, with being apps on a smartphone that you can recover and have it saved storedly as well at the custodian that you choose to do so. That's the real key problem to solve for blockchain technology to be successful with the wider audience, I think.
So you're saying that mass adoption is dependent
on the private key management.
Definitely, yeah.
So Daniel raised a very interesting topic. So how do we drive mass adoption? What are the main drivers? We talk a lot about blockchain technology. Everyone agree there's a huge potential, but currently we don't really have mass adoption yet, far from it. So let's start from the governor. So what do you think are the main driver factors to push and help mass adoption?
Of blockchain?
Yes, blockchain technology.
So I think that in terms of development blockchain technologies, most of them, as it was mentioned here, that wasn't, for example, connected with even Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So most of blockchain technologies should not be regulated. It's just technology, so you can use it or not. From the other side, blockchain technology is very interesting because it's probably it's the first technology which was financed by itself, by like cryptocurrency market. And most of blockchain projects have been financed by, for example, Bitcoin itself. It was financed by like issuing Bitcoin itself and developing. The same thing with ICOs, which were popular in 2017, for example. And now we see like development of the sphere and moving to more regulated markets, especially when it comes to customers and investors, as I mentioned. And I think that now we see that there is a demand for this services and technology and this special platforms for rising, for trading, etc. From the other side, we have ready-to-go projects. Some of them are running, but out of regulation and like in clouds, without any connection with financial institutions and government. But I think that missing thing, and which is like moving slowly than technology in demand, is governmental regulation. First of all, because of conventional financial sector, and this sphere is like dealing with people's money and assets, etc., and it's a very big responsibility. That's why government usually moving slowly, and that's why, for example, we didn't touch our central bank, which works with conventional banking services, and we established a separate regulator in order to develop forward-looking financial services, and we created a sandbox to test this regulation, how it works, if we can protect customers, how can we help to develop the startups and new projects, etc. So I think that everything is ready, and we need kind of regulation, regulation is not like just government telling how to do. It's regulation, it's an agreement between, for example, issuers and investors, between customers and product. It's just an agreement, and customers and product developers have to feel like secure, have to feel have to feel like sure that it will work and everybody is protected and so nobody get like hurt. As we see, as for example, we saw ICOs, a lot of ICOs. I was myself involved in one ICO, and I saw that more than 90% of ICOs like failed, and most of them failed because it's fraud. And this is like not good thing, and it's
absolutely. I totally share your sentiment. I think regulations, when some people in the crypto blockchain space, when they think of regulations, they automatically think, oh, you know, it's stifle innovation. But actually, I look at regulation very positively. And there's regulation there's difference between the regulation for blockchain technology and there's regulation that to limiting the disruptive power of capital deployment in unregulated markets, as you know, Karai said. For instance, China is a good example. Everyone knows China banned ICO, but China is extremely supportive of blockchain technology. So the banning of ICO, even day one, I thought it was a good thing, because if you have a ICO raising hundreds of millions but not regulated, then there are lots of gullible and vulnerable investors. If they get scammed, where do they go for legal protection? And even the laws could, you know, do not even have in place to maybe punish these wrongdoings, because strictly speaking, it's not fundraising involving in fiat. So they might even get away for regulatory loophole. So I totally share your sentiment. Regulation for blockchain technology and regulation that limiting the disruptive power of capital. I see.
May I add that in terms of that regulation, like blocking development of technology or business, I would say that we are very much requested to develop this regulation from business side. A bunch of cryptocurrency exchanges, STO platforms, even miners, they come to us and like when they see that we have developed something, this framework, they are very glad and they offer their support and help to develop like more deep regulation.
Good, very, very promising. So I hear lots of comments on that side, please, yes.
I'm only going to state we should stop talking about ICOs because they are dead. Daniel's made great money and I love him.
So did you say ICO are dead?
Yeah, right.
Okay, we're going to argue on that.
All right, great, and that's exactly the discussion and the debate that's important. I think the attention towards tokens is not so much towards ICOs. The attention towards tokenization and the crypto economics and the architecture underneath of it is towards a new model of capital formation, which is not available in existing enterprise or innovation. I think the attention is towards alignment of ownership of marketplaces and future solutions with the consumption of it, and those are historically two separate things, resulting in misalignment, and those are now in a tokenized world, one and the same thing. And then the last thing I would say for tokenization is what I was saying previously, so I won't dwell on it, and that is the financial value of it as well as the utility value of it to be considered in balance.
If I can add something, like, I don't think that we are really ready for the next wave. I mean, if you're looking from the technology perspective, the infrastructure is not there. If you look in the regulation, people are forcing ecosystem that are built on utility to securities. So just two quickly statement. I just wanted to do it shortly.
Thank you.
Please.
I just wanted to add it to your comment on China. It's very true. The reason they banned it, because we were working with the policymakers, is the main reason was to protect the internal investors. That was the main idea. But what they found out, I'm sure you're aware of it, is that it did not reduce, it did not kill, it did not even reduce the business. It just pushed the business overseas.
Yes, you do have a point. It's true. It did not stop, but at least it didn't. It helped to reduce the potential level of scam projects, let's say. So with banning of ICO, if some people are still contributing, still an issue ICOs, and at least if something happens, they cannot go on the street to do mass protest. And that's even before the ICO. That's cases of some illegal fundraisings. And then when people make money and you don't hear about it, when they lose money and they go straight on the protest. So I would say it's really the rules to really protect vulnerable investors. Of course, it cannot stop it, no, but it would help to reduce the disruptive power of misabuse of capitals.
Yeah. But the question, if I can come back to the core question, was adaptation and how blockchain will be more adapted going forward, if I remember correctly, no?
Sorry?
Talking about ICOs at the moment, but the question was really about blockchain technology, how
oh yes, exactly, yes, we just diverted.
And I think it's a question of the first and most important thing is education. It's all about education. There's so much misconception still when it comes to what is blockchain. Most of the people probably here in Davos still think of blockchain equals Bitcoin and Bitcoin equals drug money and laundering. And so it starts on that level to actually explain the technology, what it is all about. And the core concept of the technology is decentralization. Decentralization means there's less intermediaries, there's much more efficient processing of whatever it is going to be in the future. That means it needs business education. What does it mean to have financial services with less intermediaries, much more efficient ways of capital management, much more ways of actually making sure things are actually done properly. So that needs education in the business context as well. And then regulation needs to be there in order to underwrite these new business models that will come about. So it's all a question of education. And then technology needs to be scalable. That's the next problem.
Yeah.
And I was just going to that question next, is that what you asked, how to bring it in the mass. So what he said is completely correct, what Daniel said. What I do is I always, because I try to anticipate the future, so I always look from history. I come from Netherlands, and what they did, they used to have this PIN, you could make payments with your PIN card. And then they came up with this chip knip. So that was something that you can play small amounts. There was nearly nobody accepted it. The public didn't take it. There was no adoption. Till what they started doing is they started cutting the use of the existing app and increasing the price of it, that slowly people really started moving into this quick, this non-PIN payment system. So what I would say is use the existing functionality or app, complement it with a new blockchain application technology, and then slowly start increasing the price of transaction of the existing app. Then you will have a mass adoption. But for that, you need the support of the authorities. And I mean, if you look at emails that took over the actions of post office, or if you take the Skype that took over the actions of telephone. So these are existing. So the only way to do it is work complementary and then slowly take place. That will save. That will help in mass adoption.
Just a little segue. I wanted to come back to the identity point and share some color on it. Are we on a different floor? Or,
I think really.
Where would you like to take the discussion, Lily?
We don't have lots of time left.
Okay.
And you have so much knowledge in all these topics. I would really love to. Maybe one day we have a separate panel on those topics, and I can pick your brains.
I probably missed the prep.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
So to touch upon the topic of regulations, I also want to comment from my personal views. I think there are two key elements for mass adoption, in my personal opinion. So one, I think, is simplicity, because now everyone thinks about the blockchain, smart contracts. It is so complicated. It is for tech-savvy people, and it should not be the case. For instance, NEO is a smart contract platform. Everyone thinks about smart contract is something complicated, and I like to use the Nick Szabo. He's one of the cryptography. He used the analogy of smart contracts with a vending machine. His vending machine is the simplest smart contracts. And you put a coins, you get a selection of your drinks and you get it. If you put more coins, you get a change. So its automation is like a smart contract. So to me, it's a simplicity. Because if people have to spend hours to figure out something, it's not because people are not tech savvy, it's because we're all short of time. So it needs to be really, really simple to use. So this is one. And the second one is regulations. I'm in favor of regulations because for any technology, it just cannot have mass adoption if you are operating on a regulatory gray zone. It needs to be very clear from regulatory point of view. And Ronald, do you want to comment on this, mass adoption?
Yeah, I mean, for me, blockchain or distributed ledger technology enters into mass adoption when I'm using the technology without knowing it.
Yes.
And the technology will be used if it creates efficiency, and I can benefit of these efficiencies in the background, but I don't know that I use the technology.
Yeah.
And I have a little bit a different approach regarding regulation. I mean, regulation is something good, but we have to be very careful because even if you look at the report from the Federal Council in Switzerland about blockchain technology, which is, I think, more than 160 pages, the report talks about what happens in the past, in the last 2 years. But if you are in the community and talk to people, especially to tech people, they are already 2 or 3 years ahead. And everything that is in this report is not covered what happens in the next year. So I think if you talk about regulation, it always has to be on a technology neutral basis.
Yeah, yeah.
And coming back to tokens, if you're using a token to do something or using a paper, it doesn't matter. At the end, the question is, what kind of behavior do you want to regulate or not?
Yeah.
And therefore, I think it's still time to watch and to learn. What you can do is, as a regulator, this is my opinion, to give guidelines, to show how you think that law should apply to what happens on the market. But creating new regulation is very critical because you don't know if you're creating a regulation that is already outdated when you're gonna release it.
Very good point, yeah. Anyone else want to comment on regulations?
No, I can add that we need smart regulation because right now there is a lot of smart people that are going back to the academia. Why? Because the system is forced to securitizing things, and the first approach was to build an ecosystem to have utility. There are different projects on that. I can mention numerous of that, but. And that's what I'm mostly afraid of, that with those regulations in place, we are cannibalizing the ecosystem, how is intended and built today.
Yeah.
Thank you. This gives me a chance to finish, this thread gives me a chance to finish the previous 2 comments.
Yeah, 2 minutes.
Sure. One of the supply chain implementation work I was talking about, you know, the 3 challenges around that, of course, were around getting the ecosystem aligned. Regulatory was the other one.
Yeah.
And then the design of the token as far as the functionality is concerned is the 3rd challenge around that. Let me come back to the regulatory part specifically. I mentioned something previously called the Hinman Standard of Tokens.
Yeah.
Go take a look at it. But basically, it defines a level of decentralization. So when I said, to understand tokens, you have to understand networks. And the other thing I said, you have to understand decentralization. So decentralization is being one of the frameworks, in addition to Howey's test in the US environment, is now also being tested against a statement that was given on, I remember this date, 14th of June last year, by the finance director of the SEC, William Hinman. And therefore, it's being called the Hinman Standard of framework of tokens, and the main point around that is, what is a sufficiently decentralized network? We as technologists call it decentralization. The regulators, SEC, is concerned about, Ben, what you mentioned, and that is to avoid asymmetry of information, right? So 2 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you. You can have 1 more minute if it's strongly wished.
I'll yield.
Okay. Good. Anyone else on the comment on regulations?
But because regulatory is indeed one of the most, or maybe the most important part, but that's what I also try to tell, is that we should really find the balance, not go too much. Because if you go too much on the regulatory, if you look at our existing systems, the most regulated systems are also the most inefficient. Is the health, is the transport, is the finance. So, but to ask from the policymaker to make policies, regulatory, of a system which they still do not understand and which is still not mature, is like a chicken and egg story. So it is a game, and in that part, I really believe that Switzerland and Liechtenstein are doing a very good job of giving a kind of sandbox where people can play around and work together with the regulatory authorities to come with a standardization.
Yeah, it's really quite a fine balance in the blockchain space. You know, we talk about 3 layers. The protocol layer, like what Neo is doing, we are basically technology platform. And then you have the regulatory layer, and what is technically feasible, it doesn't mean it's regulatory feasible. And then you have the application layers. So now when we talk about applications, they're not running fast, and there's not too many very active dApps. We also have to look at the regulatory layers. The technology is still improving as well. So very interesting. Now, one last question, since we are talking about tokenization of assets. I want to ask everyone that if you have to tokenize something, then what would you tokenize?
Yeah, I think that like if you accept especially crypto assets as a payment, so it's perfect to tokenize a venture business, like venture capital investments, startups, etc. Because there is a certain level of risks and good like potential for revenues, for income. So and when people go to cryptosphere, they understand this risk sometimes. So and regulator have to do this. And when they go to investments to tokenized assets, so it probably can be like very good example.
So you would tokenize a venture capital fund, okay? And Ronald?
I mean,
1 minute each maximum.
So if you're asking me what I would tokenize, if I can do a token sale, maybe I would do a reverse token sale and tokenize my time for my whole work career, because then I know that I got work for the whole of my work life cycle.
Interesting. Okay. Tokenize your time. That's so in line with you know, being a legal professional. Your time, you're billed per hour.
That's the attention token.
And
I mean,
Andreas,
thank you. For me, I would like say something close to what Ronald just said. Maybe not my time, maybe my data. My data, my personal data.
Your data.
Yeah,
okay.
my data. Yeah.
I think.
My data that, you know, like nowadays, you go on Facebook, you go on like all those websites, and you're just a product of those websites. You're being the fruit, and all this data is being like out of your control, and you should be rewarded for the data you're providing to those platforms. So I believe that, like, for example, like the project like BAT, the basic attention token, I think like a project like those should like come forth more often.
I think Daniel next, you must be quite happy to hear that.
Yes, you should look at Web3.global. That's the exact business model behind that project. But I would tokenize real estate, which is for me the most obvious case, especially in places like Switzerland where you cannot buy real estate easily because of prices. And so you can actually, with new models, when tokenizing real estate, get new people actually ownership over a longer period of time rather than renting through tokenized real estate.
Thank you.
Yeah, from my perspective, fractional ownership should go to use cases where you have less transaction, a lot of costs. Real estate could be one good use case. I think also every luxury assets in general where you have less transaction and more value on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, being an environmentalist is for me quite easy. It's forest management and administration, because then you don't only give the authorities and the major billionaires or millionaires, but also simple people, the natives living in the Amazon or in Africa, can own a part of their own forest, and they can be responsible for not only taking care, but also the money, because forests also are economical points.
Yeah.
They generate funds, so they can also earn from that. So, of course, tokenization of forestry.
Great.
I would tokenize the world of things, as in IoT or
Yeah.
Internet of Things, because all models in the last 2 decades that have been tried to incentivize, promote, advance, mature, adapt IoT have failed. I've personally worked on 4 of those, and they've all four failed. But we are now poised in a new environment where there could be digitization of those physical assets, which goes hand in hand with the tokenization, meaning, and that would go hand in hand with the identity of those, which, by the way, was the identity point I wanted to share. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the identity of things is as important as the identity of people. So.
Great. Thank you very much. So this draw a conclusion to our panel, and it's really fascinating answer from everyone. And thank you very much for the time, and thank you so much to audience for being here and for your attention. Now we have 10 minutes to
Q&A. Yes.
Yes.
Questions.
Yeah.
Anybody?
Be brave.
Thank you. My name is Anir Chaudhary. I'm from the government of Bangladesh. I run a large digitization program across the entire country, from the Prime Minister's office and the Cabinet office and the ICT ministry. So it's a combination of ministries working together for the entire digitization of the government and also private sector services. And we are increasingly looking at blockchain. In this entire conversation, the most interesting part for me was the last 5 minutes, where he started talking about use cases. I think all the discussion that I have been to in blockchain, it starts with why blockchain is useful, but doesn't get to the use case in the beginning. And I think that's really, for me, as a manager of whether I was using technology or not, the beauty of the technology lies in what problems it can solve.
Yeah.
So if we can start talking about the problems that blockchain can actually really solve, and I'm not criticizing blockchain at all,
Yeah.
but I think understanding the problem and then applying the beauty of blockchain would really help adopt it better, I think. Otherwise, what I often find is that it's the hammer looking for a nail syndrome often. So again, I don't mean to criticize, but I would like to hear that discussion probably for another 20 minutes if possible. Thank you.
So because we have to finish at 3, I know it's a really fascinating topic. And also, I know that we started assuming everyone is in the blockchain sector, and rather than highlighting what the benefits, what the pain points blockchain could solve. You're totally right. This could easily run for another 20 minutes or even 1 hour. So hopefully next time we have to finish.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Just since we are working in that space of government services, can be very specific about what blockchain can help is first and foremost digital identity. So you can, as a government, issue identities securely, as described before, in the future in a self-sovereign way as well. And secondly, the killer use case for me and what we are doing with ProCivis is actually e-voting, digital voting, both in the context of government, but also in context of commercial applications like AGM. If you can actually provide a service that gives back trust in government and in politics by providing a service that actually makes it transparent that your vote is counted, but you know it's done in an anonymized fashion, and it cannot be manipulated anymore afterwards. That's a whole new league when it comes to people trusting in political systems and democracy as a whole. So that's exactly what we are doing with my company, and there's a very real use case where I think blockchain will be, for the first time ever, a technology that can help address this problem.
So, sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah. I know your Prime Minister because I was talking to your minister also on this topic, I think last year, September, at the UN in New York. I think one of 3 places where I think, because Bangladesh has anyway problem, this constant flood coming in, flood to land registration, and that would be very credible use of blockchain. And secondly would be forest registration, because you have the Sundarban and all this forestry where they have problems with this how do you call it, salination, That's what I could just think out of these two, where you can really use the blockchain technology, because it's also the data is very corrupted. So blockchain at least gives you the chance to register it correctly.
Did you say Bangladesh or Andhra Pradesh? Bangladesh, sorry.
Yeah.
I got it a little mixed up. You're totally right. I won't take too much time. But one of the cautions that I would raise from having advised the blockchain effort at Andhra Pradesh, who has a pavilion over here, is you just have to be careful, because it is government sponsored, on how much of centralization you're going to end up with, which in an otherwise decentralized, culture of a technology. So centralization of the identity is really important, and is an important caution. And centralization, meaning custody of the data, is really important on how you're going to balance it.
Yeah.
And if you can't handle that, then don't use blockchain.
I just wanted to add to this, because what discussion I had with the ministers, they're, compared to many other countries, they're really advanced.
Yeah.
So they have, the minister really understands the decentralized structure of this technology.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It goes back to the point on, is it sufficiently decentralized? Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Last 10 years actually moved by leaps and bounds. So if you looked at what Bangladesh was in a digital space in the last 10 years ago versus now, it's actually moved leaps and bounds. Yeah. So we understand technology and the application of it in specific cases. Yeah. So blockchain is something where, so as you mentioned, land records, ID, education certificates. So there are about 6 use cases that we're exploring right now, except that we don't know which ones will give us the low-hanging fruits, which blockchain technologies to use, what kind of capacity development we have to have within the government and within the private sector. So these are the challenges that we're grappling with. And maybe I'll talk to a few of you after the panel.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
That's for you.
I'm Renate from Geneva. I represent a Geneva-based think tank, the Geneva Macro Labs. Thank you very much for the discussion. I find it very inspiring. And I have a question regarding regulations. And as you said before, it doesn't really make sense to regulate on the technical side because, until the regulation is in place, it takes time. On a EU level, it takes years. So the technology is much faster, so it doesn't really make sense. So my idea is to rather look at it as a horizontal layer and to regulate the underlying sectors like financial services, healthcare, real estate, energy, and to include it in this regulation. For example, in the financial services, regulate the blockchain side, and coming from this aspect, do you think that would be reasonable?
Ronald?
Yeah. So for me, it's already too sector specific.
Yeah.
I think it should not be depending on a sector. It should really depending on what you're doing. So I can give you a simple example. In Swiss law, for certain contracts, you need to have a written signature. And the purpose of having a written signature on a contract is that afterwards you can prove that both parties agreed to the contract. So the written signature is already a technology. So for me, it doesn't matter if I have a written signature or if we make a video together and tell to the camera, yes, we agreed to this agreement, it's fine for us. I don't care, because at the end, the purpose is to have an evidence at the later stage that both parties entered into the agreement. And I think you have to think from this perspective, and it doesn't matter in which sector you apply a technology. It's just about what you're doing with the technology. And then, based on this, maybe it has an affection, because if you use a technology to do or to create pharmaceuticals or something like that, of course, then it's regulated again, but it depends really on what you're doing.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to comment?
I'll just add, I think it will complicate, what he mentioned is true, it will just complicate it much further than trying to, at least, because we are still in Dutch you say the children's shoes. We are still at a very starting of it. So it's better to keep it as general and as than to start going on vertical sectors.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dennis Lamb. I'm a founder of IoT Block. We are an enterprise IoT solutions blockchain company based in Silicon Valley. I also represent a lot of folks in the Silicon Valley that does blockchain research, such as blockchain at Berkeley and research over at Stanford University. I would have a question that's more geared towards Gurvinder, since you have experience at IBM and enterprise. I wanted to ask, I wanted to ask a question is, the trends that you see in blockchain and IoT, which segment do you see more demand, and how enterprise would like to utilize blockchain in the sense of IoT? And another question for everyone in general is, in terms of the consensus mechanism, I know there's multiple ways of doing it. What do you see is in demand for enterprise adoption, whether it is a specific consensus algorithm such as proof of work, proof of stake, permission blockchains that's governed by consortiums? Where do you see the general trend of consensus being used in the enterprise field?
All right, let me take that. So really two questions, two parts to the answer. One is where am I seeing kind of most of the growth? Definitely two, maybe there's a third. Three is always a good answer. But I'll point out mobility, automotive, and the other is energy. And excuse me. And we all know at a macro level the disruption that is happening in both those industries. Autonomous driving, electric vehicles, mobility, drones, flying taxis, you name it. It's totally exploding and being accepted by consumers. The nature of transactions is going to be very significantly different. We are not going to be talking about. We can't imagine. There was a question around use cases. We have to reimagine such disruptive industries as opposed to look at them in the context of old use cases. You can't take old use cases and necessarily apply them to the disruption that technology side as well as the consumption side, like an autonomous is, because you're looking at safe passage and autonomous passage of vehicles through interactions. Digital Twin Labs. I ran the hackathon for Mercedes-Benz just 2 months ago, and one of the hacks around there was, what if there is an emergency situation in a vehicle, and if it's autonomous, it can negotiate passage very quickly. So the nature of transactions have to happen autonomously and very quickly, which builds the case for crypto tokens, cryptocurrencies for those kind of transactions. You can't have fiat currencies settle and approve for those kind of transactions. Similarly, energy, the decentralization of energy basically means that every home, every person, different things is potentially a contributor to the energy grid. So now when it is it's no longer a one-dimensional or two-dimensional marketplace, it's an n-dimensional marketplace. The velocity and the nature of transactions is very different. How do you keep control? So blockchain now becomes a transaction engine to keep control of those of those aspects. The second part of your question, I'm blanking out a little bit, was? Consensus. All right, consensus. I'll be real brief. We can follow up offline. Yes, and that's a great question. By the way, I've been associated with the blockchain at Berkeley right since its inception. Yes. Hey. I'm from blockchain. Hey, there you are, man. How are you, Professor? Welcome. And that is, let's just take one element of consensus, and that is randomness, you're right, for fairness of consensus. And when you are, let's say, in the mobility space, one of the randomness elements you get is the location, because location is always changing. So you can look at location as a vector into computing consensus of those nodes. There's more to this discussion. We'll take it offline.
Great, thank you so much. And so with the time limitation, we'll have to finish the panel. I thank all the panelists for fascinating discussion and a great audience and the great questions. So feel free to approach any of the panelists for a more one-to-one if you have more questions. Thank you so much, everyone, and thanks so much for Caspian Week, especially Igor and Nina for the excellent organization. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Applause, please.